Welcome back. I am recording from my basement. I am back home, not in the office anymore, officially on maternity leave, and I'm popping on to share my birth story with baby number 4. This was our first planned home birth, and if you go back to episode 34, you will learn why we chose a home birth for this 4th child after 3 beautiful hospital-based natural childbirth experiences. We moved and we had to find a new care team, and I dive into great length in episode 34 of Holistically Well of how we came to that decision and why we felt it was the best choice for this baby and this birth. And today's episode is all about sharing our birth story. If you're anything like me, you love hearing birth stories, and I have had a number of you reach out saying that you were excited to hear this one, and I'm excited to share it. So today I am 1 week and 1 day postpartum as I'm sitting down to record this. It's the first time I've put makeup on and done my hair, so please know this is not normal in these early postpartum days. But the reason I'm put together today is because we just did newborn pictures. So we had a family friend who lives just down the road. She's an incredible newborn photographer. We went to her house and pulled our daughter out of school for an hour and got some family pictures, some pictures of just the kids, and then tons of precious newborn pictures of our new baby. So his due date, our baby boy's due date, was Christmas Day. And all along I had in mind, okay, this baby is going to come the day or two before Christmas, just because that is how my babies have been. They've been right around their due date. So for reference, my first child came 2 days after her guest date, after her due date. My second kiddo came 1 day before his due date. And then my third kiddo actually came 2 weeks early. So this time around, I was ready for my baby to come anywhere from that 38 week to a couple of days past Christmas was just my mindset. And instead, he ended up waiting for 6 days past his due date. And so my prayer all along had been that this baby would come in the month of December. And on December 30th, I had a midwife appointment and I asked her to check me. I was like, I want to know where I'm at. So we did a cervical check, and I was 1 centimeter dilated and 60% effaced. And that can mean something or it can mean nothing. I am somebody who likes to have information. So there's a lot of information out there about cervical checks and how somebody can be dilated at a 3 or a 4 and stay that way for a while. Or you could be at a 1 and then go into labor the next day, which was my case. So I had her do a partial membrane sweep. She swept as much as she could, but she was like, I really couldn't get in there a ton. It's still pretty closed and firm. And so I left that appointment pretty disappointed. I was like, goodness, at my 40-week appointment, if I made it to 40 weeks, we were able to do a full membrane sweep in the past, and baby came a few days later. So to only be at a 1, to be pretty closed and hard in terms of my cervix was defeating. I was like, all right, we are probably not going to have a baby in this year. So not only in the month of December, but in the year of 2025. And my midwife's recommendation was to just go home and do something that brings me joy, enjoy time with my husband. And we ended up having a family member had taken our kiddos. My parents had our children, like thinking back to how everything unfolded. But my parents had our children that evening during my appointment. They said, let us keep them for dinner. You guys do whatever you would like. I had some steaks de-thawed in the fridge. We ended up making those and just had a really nice dinner, just the 2 of us. That evening, the kids went down for bed well, and we just had a relaxing evening together. And it was nice to do things that just brought each of us joy. And I was just like, I'm getting, baby off my radar of like how to induce this labor, because I kept trying to do all the things to help my body along, right? And in reality, baby will come when baby's ready. And that just internal timer kicks off and gets things going. And so I went to bed and I told my husband, I hope that I am sitting on that couch tomorrow night watching the Buckeyes play in the playoffs. They were playing on New Year's Eve at 7:30 p.m. And he looked at me and was like, that's not very likely, but I like your optimism. And lo and behold, to not be a spoiler, but that's exactly what ended up happening. So that night we went to bed and I woke up at 1:30 a.m. with just that tightening that starts in my back, wraps around to the front, and then eases off. And I was like, that's interesting. That felt different than a Braxton Hicks, but I'm not going to get my hopes up. So used the restroom, went back to bed. Same thing happened at 3:30 in the morning. Interesting. Same thing happened at 4:30 and then like 6:30. So I said, okay, maybe things are going to happen today. So when I used the restroom at about 7:30 in the morning, I had bloody show. And I had to remind myself this could be because she did a partial cervical sweep, or this could be losing my mucus plug, which is what it looked like. It looked like a true bloody show. And so those light contractions continued, but they were maybe like 15 to 20 minutes apart as we started our morning. And so I ended up putting my pumps on. I have wearable pumps. I was like, let's see if these contractions can pick up. I would love to have a baby today. It was New Year's Eve. And so put the pumps on for 15, 20 minutes and the contractions continued. So my husband brought our 2 boys. We have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old boy. He brought them up to our community gym to just burn some energy. He used a golf simulator. They got out of the house. My daughter stayed home with me, and I said, all right, we're going to do a lateral movement circuit. See if we can keep these contractions going, help baby get down into the right position. So we did a 20-minute workout with lots of lateral lunges, lateral step-ups, kind of mimic curb walking. It was cold outside, so it wasn't really a day to go outside and do that. And after that 20-minute workout, I then laid in side lying. And that was my real test to be like, okay, are these contractions going to continue or are they just going to stop? And this was just all for show. Well, they continued in side lying. And again, they were light, very manageable, but very kind of textbook early labor. I was like, okay, we're going to get a little nap in here now. And so my daughter was so sweet. She rubbed my back as we were doing that. I listened to some just calming meditations. I used the Made for This app, and they have guided meditations and prayers for early labor, for relaxation during labor. And that just really put me in a really good headspace to be like, allow my body to open, allow my body to relax, and just spent a lot of time in prayer for about 40 minutes, kind of resting there on side lying on one side and then on the other. So about 20 minutes on each side. When I got up from that, I put the pumps back on to be like, okay, can we pick this up a little bit more? Because again, they were still like 10 minutes apart probably and very light. So when my husband came back from the gym, it was New Year's Eve. We had plans with his family. We were going to go bowling. And again, my midwife had told me, do your typical day. Like, don't just sit around waiting for baby. Like, continue with other plans to keep your mind off of the waiting. And so he asked if I wanted to go bowling and was ready to do that. And I said, no, I am not going bowling. I think we're going to have a baby today, and you're not going bowling either. He looked at me and was like, okay, I guess she really thinks this is happening. So my in-laws picked up our older 2 children to bring them bowling. This was about 11:30 in the morning. And then our youngest stayed home with us. He and my husband and I all ate lunch together, had a nourishing meal there, and then we laid our almost 2-year-old down for a nap. And after we laid him down for a nap around 12:30, that's when things I feel like started picking up a little bit more. I walked on the treadmill for about 15 minutes. They picked up a little bit more, sat back on a physio ball, like a birth ball, and applied the pumps again. And this would have been the last time that I applied the pumps, but just to be like, okay, could we again help things along a little bit here? And they did pick up in intensity at that point. And I think it was when my mom brain finally turned off of having all of my kids around me. And again, they were just really sweet, and it was fun to have them as part of that early labor process. But my body, I would say, then switched into active labor around 12:30, 1 o'clock, probably more like 1 o'clock once we put our son down for his nap. And at that point, I started to be like, okay, I need to let my birth team know what's going on. I had let them know about the bloody show earlier in the morning, but then really didn't give them much of an update other than I'm having some contractions, but they're light, and I don't know if this is really labor. And so I said, okay, I definitely think I'm in labor and transitioning into that active form of labor. Now I'm having to pause, breathe through them more. My midwife said to time them because I hadn't been. I had just been taking care of the kids, doing things around the house at the same time. So I started timing them, and they were 45 seconds in duration, 5 minutes apart on average for 30 minutes. And she said, do you want me to come? I said, no, this is manageable. Like, I'm doing great. Then I decided to tell my doula, and I told her where I was at. And she said, I will come over. And we had talked all along about how she usually likes to come before the midwives, and then she can help with making that call on if it's time for them to come or not. Because when the midwives come, my midwife group for my home birth was coming with 2 midwives and a midwife assistant who was a midwife in training. So they came with 3 people. They came with oxygen and all of their tools. And so when they come, it's like bringing your own little mini hospital unit into your home. And so some moms, that can kind of throw them out of their own little labor space. So my doula very sweetly came at about 1:45. And at that point, she started timing my contractions, and I was like every 2 to 3 minutes. And she said, yeah, we should tell Rachel to come. And so we told my midwife to come, and her ETA was 2:26. So after my doula got there, I was first on the birth ball. Then we went over to the toilet, and she had me sit on it backwards. And that's when contractions really did start picking up to the about every 2 minutes. So she recommended retransition then to side lying to help my body just slow things down a little bit until the midwife got there and to see where I was at. So we were then in side lying, and the midwife got there at 2:26, unloaded all of their stuff. And at about 2:45, she asked if she could check me. And I was still in side lying. We had just been flipping from side to side. And I said, yes, check me, see where we're at. And as all of this is going on, my husband had started to fill up the birth pool. He and my almost 2-year-old actually blew it up together before we laid him down for the nap, just to start getting things prepared. Some of the other things you have to get prepared for a home birth are to put on your bed, you put a shower curtain on top of your regular sheet, and then you put an older sheet on top of that. So you have protection for your mattress should your water break on your bed. And then my ideal goal was to deliver in the birthing pool. So we wanted that set up. And we also had a shower curtain under that, and that was set up in our living room. And our Christmas tree was right there. Again, this was New Year's Eve, and we're Catholic, so we celebrate, the full season of Christmas that goes through January 6th on the Feast of the Epiphany. And so it was right in the midst of that Christmas season still for our Christmas due date baby. And so anyways, the midwife checked me, and I was at an 8 to 9 for dilation. And I was shocked because I was preparing myself for her to say, you're at a 4, maybe a 5. And then I oftentimes will go from that to like a 7 to a 10 very quickly. But I had been in side lying for a while and not upright. So I was preparing myself mentally for like a 4, then we'd get upright. Things would progress quickly, then I'd be able to get into the water, into the tub, was my thought. Well, here I was 8 to 9 centimeters dilated, which was amazing because I still was kind of in denial that this was active labor and that baby would be coming soon. I very much was handling contractions well, breathing through them well. And I think a huge piece of that was, I was at home. I never had to pack things up, get into a car, leave the house, and undergo kind of that stress in my body. I was just relaxed and at home, and my toddler was napping in the next room. And my doula was amazing. She massaged my back, massaged my feet, and it was just so nice to have her intuition there. She just intuitively knew where my body needed to relax and was so good at reminding me things that I had told myself in other labors of relax your jaw, relax your shoulders, breathe baby down, just those gentle cues and reminders that in my past deliveries, it was only my husband and I, and then the hospital midwife group team, but I had to kind of tell my husband what I needed. And that was the biggest difference with having the doula there. She knew what I needed and I didn't have to voice it. And so it allowed me to just really be in my body. And then my husband would step in for her if she would go and talk to the midwives. And it was just this really nice dynamic. So as I mentioned, I was dilated to an 8 to a 9. However, baby was still high. And so that was kind of the shocker. Baby was at a -3, which means he was not even engaged down into my pelvis or down past my pubic bone. So if you're familiar with baby's positioning terms, the pubic bone is 0, and then we go -1, -2, -3 as they're positioning above it, and he was a -3. As we move down past the pubic bone, we go +1, +2, +3 as they make their way down and through the birth canal. So he was a -3, and at that point, baby's not engaged in the pelvis. Anything can happen at that point as baby lowers down and through. And so my midwife said she has to stay inside lying. She can't get in the tub yet. I know you're fully dilated, but we want this baby to come down slowly. We want to slow his descent versus if I had gone onto the toilet again or into a squat position as I had done with my other two, he'd come down very quickly, which could happen and be fine, or it could happen and lead to a complication, which we obviously want to avoid. And so she was just being cautious out of optimal safety, especially with the fact that we were at home, right? So we stayed inside lying for an hour. So I did 30 minutes on one side, 30 minutes on another. And again, my doula massaged me and just was amazing at giving me those positive affirmations. I had my birth playlist playing. And again, I was handling it really well. And for me, my goal along was getting dilated because usually that's more my issue. And so I was just really happy with the fact that I was almost fully dilated already. We had to be inside lying for an hour to slow this descent, and then I could get in the pool. And so it was just this mindset of like, we can do this. I'll also mention that right before the midwives got there, I threw up. And so we think that was probably my transition point because I never had, in terms of true transition, I never had in this birth like a freak out moment of, I don't know if I can do this. I'm in too much discomfort. I'm in too much pain. I don't know if I can do this. I never hit that point. And in each of my other labors, I did. I had a clear transition point, and then, a few minutes later, I was fully dilated and I was ready to push. And so we think me throwing up right before the midwives got there was probably that point of transition where I became nearly fully dilated and baby just hadn't dropped though. And potentially that's why it just wasn't as noticeable for me. But also, I think it's a true testament to preparing the mind as much as the body for this birth. And if you are going to do a home birth, you have to prepare your mind as well as your body, because mindset is a huge piece of this for staying calm and staying in your body and not feeling like you're out of control. And I felt in control the whole time. And so you'll hear a lot about like pain-free birth, and I listened a lot to that podcast, to the Pain-Free Birth podcast leading up to this. And I will say things were intense. I felt pressure. There were intense muscle contractions, but I was relaxed and I knew it was for a purpose. And so it wasn't painful as I was moving through this labor. It was simply feeling the body make a big muscle contraction, allow myself to relax and breathe through it and open. And then I had a break and I was talking and laughing and joking in between the contractions. And then I'd feel them come on and I would just focus on letting my whole body go and relax and be as limp as possible to let that contraction do what it needed to do. And so that's especially what I focused on that next hour, on keeping it, quote, pain-free and allowing my uterine contractions just do what they needed to do. And so when she checked me after an hour, I was a complete 10 dilation. She could feel no cervix. However, I was at a +2. And so I had only dropped essentially like 1 inch. And at that point, the birth tub was fully ready. We had delayed things kind of an hour. And she said, okay, you can get up. If a contraction comes on, I want you to be kind of more horizontal, like hands on knees versus like squatting down. We want to avoid the help of gravity, whereas usually in labor, we're wanting gravity to help us. And so she did allow me to go to the bathroom because I didn't want to pee in the pool. She said, it's sterile. You can pee in the pool. I said, I'd rather pee on the toilet. But she was very stern, my midwife, in saying, if you get a contraction, get off of the toilet and get your body like leaning over the vanity or on all fours on the floor. So use the restroom. A contraction came on afterwards. I bent over the vanity or sink, allowed that contraction to move through, and then walked to the birth tub. When I got in the birth tub, about 1 or 2 contractions later, I felt something come out of my body. And I knew it wasn't the head. And I fell down and it felt like a water balloon outside of my body. And I knew that was the bag of waters, but I had never felt that before. My water had always broken, and then I had the urge to push. So it was really different this fourth time around, where I was feeling the urge to push, like as soon as I got in the water, but my water hadn't released yet. And so it just wasn't as strong of an urge as I had the other ones. And so when this balloon came out of my body, the midwife fell and she was like, that's your bag of waters. If you leave that intact, he will come out in call, which is really awesome. If you look it up, it's when a baby comes out in their bag of waters, like the bag of waters just never breaks. She said, or if you want to, you can break it and then you'll be able to feel his head. And she was able to reach in and she felt his head, because her biggest concern this whole time, and we were able to talk and reflect afterwards, her biggest concern was to make sure baby didn't descend too fast and that the cord would descend first and get stuck, essentially like a cord prolapse. So we took optimal caution to just slow his descent. And that was really the reasoning all along, to make sure that his head is what descended first. And the bag of waters came out. I, for a while being like a minute, thought about leaving it intact, but I just felt like I needed to feel his head. Like I wanted to feel with my fingertips my baby's head and to know that it was right there. And so I pinched and twisted that bag of waters and felt that release. And that's when I could feel the pressure of his head and got that more intense uterine ejection reflex, where my body just kind of took over in terms of pushing him out. So his head came out the next contraction. And as his head came out, my midwife saw a hand. He had a hand on his face and she saw his fingers. And so that can be a huge issue for tearing in terms of a huge vaginal tear. If as they come out, they then bring their elbow out and around. And so she said, I see a hand. I am going to help guide his arm out. And I did not realize this at the time, but in talking with her today, she actually reached her hand in to get to his elbow to help guide his elbow out as I pushed the rest of his body out. And so I, with the next contraction, was able to push his body out. She guided his arm so his elbow stayed against his body and he didn't wing his elbow out and cause a significant tear, right? So his body came out. She helped kind of push him under the water so that I could catch him. So I was able to then, I was kneeling and kind of laying over the side of the tub, and my husband was right there by my head. And as he came out, came out behind me. So I had to flip over, do a athletic maneuver right after delivery, flip over so I was seated and could catch him and pull him up to my chest. And so that's exactly what I did. I flipped over, pulled him up to my chest, and he was just wiggling, and I could just tell he's okay. He's here, he's breathing, and he came out so calm, and he was huge. I knew right away he was my biggest baby. Again, the pushing was the most intense ever, and I now know because baby's hand was there, but also my midwife's hand was in there. And after we weighed him, he was 9 pounds, 10 ounces, so he was a huge baby. And my midwives even commented that usually the head is the biggest part of the baby, but he is big boned. He's got like a big chest, and his chest is actually bigger than his head. So birthed a 9 pound, 10 ounce baby, 21 and a half inches long, in the birthing pool in our living room. And going through all of that, you may be like, oh my gosh, that sounds wild. It was so peaceful. My birth playlist was playing the whole time. The midwives were so calm through it all. Never once did they say there was a concern, or never once was there a complication. But again, they took a lot of precautions to help ease things along, just slowly, gently, and peacefully. And that is exactly why it's so important to have a talented, smart birth team with you, and to do your research if you're planning a home birth, to have providers there who know what to watch for, to know how to help physiological birth happen as it is meant to. And Yeah, it was incredible. So he was on my chest. He had a ton of vernix. So again, he was almost a week overdue. The next day would have marked a week from his due date, but he was covered in vernix. And that is, if they have vernix on them, that can be a sign that they're ahead of their due date or right at. It certainly doesn't mean that they're incredibly late or well past their due date. So he didn't look in that regard like he was a week, quote, overdue. And so it was just a good reminder that our due date is really a guess date. We don't know for sure when those babies are going to come. And with this child, it was for us a surprise surprise pregnancy in that regard, of where I hadn't tracked the cycle before we conceived him the best, my most accurate. And so my due date certainly could have been off, but he was 9 pounds, 10 ounces. So he was well cooked. He was ready to come into this world. And I am glad he did not wait another day going into that new year. So we had our New Year's Eve baby. The Christmas tree was right behind us. My birth playlist was playing, and he just was cuddled up on my chest, and he didn't come out screaming. But again, you could tell he was okay. And through all of this, I will say too, the midwife assistant, second in command midwife as well, they were taking heart tones. So they were monitoring his heart rate all throughout. And in talking with my midwife today, she said never once did his heart rate drop. So, they're watching for things like, does the baby have a cord around their neck? And that's why they're not dropping. And she said, if that were the case, we would hear heart rate decelerations as you were going through different contractions, or as you started getting lower, we would hear those heart rate decels. And he never once decelerated. He was very consistently 132 to 140s throughout my entire labor. And so he just took his time to come down. And as we examined my placenta, we did notice he had a shorter cord, and maybe that was why he took a while to descend. Maybe it was because his hand was up by his face. It could be any host of things. Maybe that was just how he was meant to be, to just stay high the whole time and then come down quickly. And again, there were no complications with him. I had 0 tearing when they inspected me later, which was incredible. Again, given his size, his hand, and my midwife's hand. 0 tearing, not even any micro tears, which I think is a true testament to pelvic floor preparation, and a big shout out to pelvic floor physical therapy. And I am just so grateful for the knowledge that I have as a pelvic floor physical therapist going into this labor and delivery and all the prep work that I did. And I think that is certainly why we didn't tear, and why I love helping other women through their pregnancies, because that is amazing what our bodies are created and meant to do. And so jumping back into the timeline of the birth story, he was on my chest and he stayed on my chest. They put a towel over him to help keep him warm, but he was in the water with me. The water was super warm, to kind of say some of the behind the scenes things. My husband was very much in charge of filling up the birth pool and keeping it the right temperature. And the midwives helped with this too, but they had a floating thermometer in there, and they liked to keep it around 95. And so the guesstimate is, well, when do you fill it up? And you don't want it to get too cold. But he filled it up most of the way, and then it sat there during that hour that I had to stay inside lying. And then they were able to bring pots of boiling water and put it in to get it nice and hot and raise the level up. And our water heater had been turned up all the way for a few days so that we had as much hot water to go into the tub as possible. So that's kind of what went in behind the scenes to have that filled up. I delivered the placenta in the water. That was the most calm placental delivery ever. I hated delivering the placenta in the hospital with my other 3 kids. I felt like it was so painful. They were pressing on my belly, in those instances to help it contract and come down. And this time it was so calm. It was not painful at all. And that was another big difference I noted. I then was able to get out of the birth tub, and they had a spot on the couch all prepped for me with a towel and chalk pads laid down. So I was able to just transition literally straight out of the water onto my couch directly behind me, baby still on my chest through all of this. And he latched on a nurse like right away. And that's when they then kind of checked my bleeding to make sure that was going okay. My doula in the meantime was making soup in the kitchen and brought me a warm bowl of soup, brought over my electrolyte water, and I was just sitting on my couch 20, 30 minutes after delivering my baby and breastfeeding him. And it was just wild. I just kept saying, wow, he's here. Wow, he's here. Thank you, Jesus. It was just very surreal. And I was able to, after eating, get up and use the shower. I used the restroom, took a shower. During that time, my husband held the baby and did some skin to skin with him. And that's when they weighed him and did like his foot inking on our paper and all of that good stuff. And through all this, they were checking my blood pressure as well. They took baby's heart tones, my heart tones. So again, midwives are trained medical providers. And I think a lot of people in talking with us through this, like, that's just crazy. You're just going to do it by yourself. And it's like, no, we did hire providers to come in who are medically trained, and they are there to be present with us and help us through and make sure that everything does look good. And so we're so grateful to have that team behind us, to have their support. And now at just over a week postpartum, my midwife has been back to my house twice. She came once in the 24 to 48 hour window to check on baby, do some additional screenings on baby, check me, again, check my uterus, check my bleeding, checked my blood pressure, my pulse, all of that. And then she came back again today at a week postpartum to take a look at things again, just make sure that we were doing well. And so the level of support without having to leave my home has been insane and so much better than only see you in 6 weeks checkup. I, from here, have the option to do 3 in-person appointments now, but at their home. So we go to their home office. So I will bring baby there in about 2 weeks to do an additional check-in. They weigh baby so we can just make sure he's gaining appropriately, all of that. He's already passed his birth weight. So he was measured today and we're now 9 pounds, 12 ounces, which is wild. We are feeding well, growing well. And yeah, to kind of complete that full circle on New Year's Eve, my in-laws who had my kiddos and brought them bowling earlier in the day, brought my oldest daughter back home to us. I had delivered in the birth pool at 4:18 p.m. is when he was born. My daughter was back over at about 6:30. The midwives left at about that time as well. And she was just the sweetest, like, postpartum doula for me then. She wanted to massage my feet, massage my leg, bring me food. And it was just so sweet and special having her there then. Each of our parents ended up coming over and getting to see baby and us briefly. They brought our other 2 boys who at that time just didn't really acknowledge the fact that there was another human in our family. But then when they came back the next day, our boys, they stayed overnight at our in-laws' house, my in-laws' house. My daughter stayed with us. And then we were all back under one roof our second night postpartum. And that's when the boys really took to wanting to see baby, wanting to touch baby, wanting to hold baby. And it's just been so special to see our youngest become a big brother and to see how each of the siblings have taken to having another sibling a little bit differently. But yeah, I am like, God gave us a daughter first because she is just the sweetest little mother hen. And it was really special that baby was born while she was still on her winter break from school. So she went back to school on January 5th. And that's when we've kind of been able to settle back into our own little routine. But from December 31st to January 5th, it was literally just our own little family unit in our own home. And those are days that I kept telling my husband, I'm like, this is what I will look back on when I'm 80. And I'm going to get emotional, but it was just such a special time. And during this time too, our new home build is getting built. They are putting the walls up. And so just seeing that come to life too, it's just been such a special week. And we are just so grateful. Thank you to this community for your outpouring of love and support as we welcome this fourth child. And as we've awaited this fourth child too, you have been with me through it all. And I'm so thankful. And he's here, he's healthy. I had my water birth finally. If you listen to episode 34, you'll get kind of a backstory on my other 3 births, but my first 2 boys, I wanted to birth in the water and they came too quickly that the tub couldn't be filled. And so this was my first peaceful water birth, and it was at home in front of our Christmas tree. I don't think it could have been any better. And I just want to say again, thank you for your love and support. And that is the birth story of Rex Francis Borchers.